Hashtag your soulmate was out with someone today. But something just happened there that you need to know about, my beloved child. Something happened last night. Not to you, not yet, but somewhere beyond what you could see. A moment took place that may have changed the direction of a story you thought was still far away. Your soulmate was out with someone today, and from the outside, it may have looked completely normal. A simple meeting, a conversation, a few quiet moments shared between two people, nothing unusual, nothing that would make anyone stop and wonder. But there was a moment there, a very small moment, when everything suddenly felt different, and that is where this story begins. Because sometimes the most important moments do not arrive with noise, they arrive quietly. A pause in a conversation, a look that lasts 1 second longer than it should, a thought that appears without warning. And today, your soulmate had one of those moments. But what caused it? That is the part that has not been fully uncovered yet. You may have been going through your own day without knowing any of this. Maybe you were thinking about other things. Maybe you were tired, maybe you had almost stopped wondering when love would finally feel simple, and perhaps, somewhere inside you, there was a small voice saying, maybe I should stop expecting anything. But then something happened today that makes that thought feel incomplete. Because while your soulmate was sitting there with someone else, the conversation somehow turned towards something deeply personal, something about love, something about the past, something about the kind of person who changes you without even trying. And suddenly, your soulmate became quiet. Why? What could have been said that made the room feel different? There was no dramatic confession, no movie-like scene, just silence. But sometimes silence tells more than words ever could. Your soulmate looked away for a moment, and according to this fictional story, a memory came back. A memory they had tried not to think about, a face, a feeling, a certain kind of peace. And strangely, that memory was connected to you, not because they had planned it, not because someone forced them to think about you. It simply happened, like a door opening by itself, and the person sitting across from them noticed the change. They asked a simple question. Who are you thinking about? Your soulmate did not answer right away. That pause matters. Because what came next was not what the other person expected. Before I continue, if this message is touching your heart, you are welcome to support this work with a super thanks. Only if it feels right for you. Now, let's continue. The question remained hanging in the air. Who were they thinking about? Your soulmate could have given an easy answer. They could have changed the subject. They could have laughed and moved on. Instead, they became even more thoughtful, because there was something about the memory that felt unfinished, something they could not explain. And this is where the story takes another turn. The person with them began talking about timing, about people who cross our path at strange moments, about connections that make no sense at first. And then your soulmate heard a sentence that seemed almost too close to their own hidden thoughts. They looked up. For a moment, they said nothing. Their hearts seemed caught between what was familiar and what was still unknown. You see, child, this story is not really about the person your soulmate was with. That person may simply have been the doorway to a conversation that needed to happen, because sometimes one person enters a room only to accidentally awaken a truth someone else has been avoiding. And today, something was awakened. Not a promise, not a guarantee, not an ending. Something smaller, but perhaps more important, a question. What if the person I thought I had forgotten was never really forgotten? Your soulmate did not say your name, not yet, but something in their expression changed, and the person sitting across from them noticed. That is when they asked one more question. A question your soulmate was not prepared to answer, and whatever happened after that may be the reason you are hearing this story now, because the next few words were simple, almost too simple, yet they opened another door, and behind that door was a memory your soulmate had kept hidden for longer than anyone knew. But what was that memory, and why did it return today? That answer is still waiting in the next part of the story, because the moment your soulmate finally understood what that memory meant, everything became much harder to ignore. My beloved child, something happened last night, in the quiet hours, when the world had finally gone still. A strange thought appeared in the story we are about to enter. Your soulmate was out with someone today, and at first, it looked ordinary, just two people sharing a moment. A simple meeting, a conversation that should have meant nothing, but then something changed, something small, something almost impossible to notice, and that tiny moment began to shift the meaning of everything that came before it, because your soulmate heard something today that they were not prepared to hear. It was not a confession. It was not an argument, it was something quieter, a sentence that made them stop, a sentence that made them look away for a moment, and suddenly, the person sitting across from them did not seem as important as they had seemed 5 minutes earlier. Why? What could have been said that caused such a change? That is where this story becomes personal, not because the other person was powerful, not because they had some secret control, but because they accidentally touched a place inside your soulmate that had been silent for a long time, a place connected to you. And there is something even more interesting. Your soulmate did not speak your name. They did not explain everything. They simply became quiet. Sometimes silence says more than a long speech. Sometimes one pause can reveal what the heart has been trying to hide. You'll understand soon. The person with them noticed the change. They asked what was wrong. Your soulmate almost answered, almost, but instead, they looked toward the window. For a few seconds, everything around them seemed distant. The voices, the movement, the noise, and in that quiet moment, an old memory returned. Not a perfect memory, not a dramatic one, just a small moment connected to you, a look, a feeling, a simple thing you may not even remember, yet somehow, it mattered. And that memory raised a question your soulmate could no longer push away. What am I really doing here? That question changed the atmosphere. The meeting continued, but their heart was no longer completely in that room. Something had moved, something had awakened, and the person sitting across from them could feel it. Before I continue, if this message is touching your heart, you are welcome to support this work with a super thanks, only if it feels right for you. Now, let's continue, because what happened next was even more unexpected. The other person tried to bring the conversation back. They laughed. They changed the subject. They tried to make the moment feel normal again. But your soulmate was thinking about something else. They were remembering the difference between being around someone and feeling understood by someone. Those are not the same thing, and today, that difference became impossible to ignore. Still, there is a part of this story that remains hidden, because your soulmate did not leave that meeting with a clear answer. They left with a question about the past, a question about the present, and perhaps, most quietly of all, a question about you. As they walked away, they reached for their phone. They stopped. Their fingers hovered over the screen. They almost did something. Then they changed their mind. Why? That little hesitation may be the most important moment of this entire story. Because sometimes the heart moves before the person is ready to admit where it wants to go, and just when it seemed the moment had passed, something appeared on that screen, something connected to a memory they had been trying not to revisit. They stared at it. They did not delete it. They did not ignore it. They simply stood there for a moment, wondering whether they should finally face what they had been avoiding. And this is where part one must pause, because whatever was on that screen was not the ending. It was only the first sign that today's meeting had opened a door neither person expected to find. The door is still open, and behind it is the part of the story your soulmate has not yet been able to explain. My beloved child, something happened last night. And somehow, the first piece of this story begins with someone you may not even know was thinking about you. Today, your soulmate was out with someone. Maybe you would never have guessed it. Maybe, if you knew where they were, you would imagine an ordinary meeting. A simple conversation. A normal day, but something changed there, not loudly, not in a way that everyone could see. It happened in a quiet moment, a moment when the room seemed to slow down, and your soulmate suddenly became lost in thought. Why? What could have made them stop smiling? What could have made them look away from the person sitting beside them? There was a feeling they could not explain. And strangely enough, that feeling led their mind back to you. But this is where the story becomes deeper, because the person they were with noticed the change. They asked a simple question. Their soulmate became very quiet, because one choice came back to their mind, a choice they once made, a choice they may have thought was finished, yet somehow, the memory still had a heartbeat, and perhaps you have felt this too. Have you ever moved forward, only to find one old thought waiting for you in the quiet? Have you ever told yourself that something no longer mattered, then felt your heart react when its name appeared again? That is where this story begins to turn, because your soulmate did not leave that meeting feeling the way they expected. They left carrying a question, not about the person beside them, about you, and that question followed them outside, into the evening air, past the lights, past the noise, all the way into the silence after the meeting ended. But what was the question? That part has not surfaced yet, and there is a reason. Some truths arrive slowly because the heart needs time to understand them. Before I continue, if this message is touching your heart, you are welcome to support this work. With a super thanks, only if it feels right for you. Now, let's continue, because after the meeting, something unexpected happened. Your soulmate reached for their phone, they paused, their finger hovered over the screen. They almost did something, almost. Then they stopped. Why? What made them pull back? Was it fear, pride, uncertainty, or was there something they suddenly realized they were not ready to face? The answer is hidden inside the smallest moment. They looked at the screen again. Then they put the phone away. But this time, they were not walking away from the thought. They were carrying it, and perhaps that is the part you need to hear. Sometimes a person does not need to speak your name for your memory to become powerful. Sometimes one quiet moment is enough, a song, a place, a sentence, a familiar feeling, and suddenly, someone who thought they had everything under control realizes there is still something unfinished inside them. But unfinished does not always mean broken. Sometimes it means the story has not reached the page where the meaning becomes clear, and today, your soulmate may have stepped into that page without even knowing it. There was one final moment before they went home, a moment so small that another person might have missed it completely, but it changed the way they looked at the night, and that moment has something to do with you. Not because the world suddenly became perfect, not because every question was answered, but because, for the first time in a while, something inside them became impossible to ignore, and just when they thought the day was over, they remembered something. Something you once said, something simple, something they never expected to remember, and what happened next. That is where this story becomes much harder to explain, because the next thought was not about the past, it was about what could happen next, and that possibility, they were not ready for. The deepest part of this moment is still hidden, and perhaps, in the silence tonight, you will understand why. About, my beloved child, something happened last night, and even though you may not know what it means yet, something shifted. Today, your soulmate was out with someone. Maybe you already knew that. Maybe you saw something. Maybe you heard a name. Or maybe you felt a strange distance without knowing why. But what happened today was not as simple as it looked from the outside. There was a moment. A quiet moment, a moment that changed the way they were thinking about you, and strangely enough, it happened while someone else was sitting beside them. You may wonder, how could being with someone else make them think about me? That is where this story becomes different, because sometimes a person can sit across from another human being, smile, talk, and act completely normal, while their heart is somewhere else, and today, something reminded them of you. It was small at first, almost too small to notice, a word, a place, a song, maybe even a simple question, but the second it happened, their mind became quiet, and in that silence, you appeared. Not as a memory they wanted to force away, but as a feeling they could not easily explain. They suddenly remembered something about you, something ordinary, something that most people would never understand, and that tiny memory carried more weight than they expected. They tried to continue the conversation, they tried to stay present, but part of them had already drifted somewhere else, somewhere familiar, somewhere connected to you. And here is the strange part: the person they were with may have noticed the change. Maybe they asked, "Are you okay?" And your soulmate gave a simple answer, "Yeah, I'm fine." But inside, something was not fine. Something had been touched, something had been awakened, and they were not ready to explain it, not yet, because sometimes the hardest truth is not admitting that you miss someone, it is admitting why you miss them. And there was another moment today that made this even deeper. They looked around. People were talking, life was moving, but for a few seconds, they felt alone in the middle of everything, and that was when the thought of you became stronger, not because they were unhappy with the person beside them, not because something terrible happened, but because comparison has a quiet way of revealing what the heart values, and suddenly, they remembered how different it feels when someone truly understands you. They remembered the feeling of being seen, the feeling of not having to explain every little thing, and perhaps, without even saying your name, they realized they were comparing that feeling to what was in front of them. That realization frightened them a little. Because once someone notices what is missing, it becomes much harder to pretend they do not notice it. But there is something else, something even quieter, something you would never have seen from where you are standing. Before I continue, if this message is touching your heart, you are welcome to support this work with a super thanks, only if it feels right for you. Now, let's continue. Because the story did not end with that realization, it actually became more personal. Later, when the conversation changed, your soulmate became unusually thoughtful. They were no longer fully listening to the world around them. Their mind was somewhere else, and one question kept rising inside them. Why am I still thinking about this person? They did not have a clean answer. Maybe they tried to push the thought away. Maybe they told themselves it meant nothing. But some feelings do not disappear just because we refuse to name them, and tonight, there is a quiet question sitting in their heart, not necessarily about the future, not yet. It is a question about truth, about what they really feel when nobody is watching. And that question may be more important than anything they said today. Because sometimes the heart speaks in silence long before the mouth finds the courage to speak. So if you have been wondering why this connection still feels unfinished, perhaps this is the part you were never meant to see from the outside. You only saw that your soulmate was out with someone today. You did not see the moment their thoughts turned toward you. You did not hear the question forming inside them. And you certainly did not see what happened after that, because there was one final moment, a moment so small that anyone else could have missed it, but your soulmate did not, and what they realized in that moment may be the reason this story is not over. Because the next thought that entered their mind was not about the person sitting beside them, it was about you, my beloved child. Something happened last night, and somehow, it connects to what happened today. Your soulmate was out with someone. You may not know who they were with. You may not know where they went. You may not know what was said, but in this story, there was a moment today that changed the feeling of the entire situation. Not because something dramatic happened, not because anyone made a grand confession, it was quieter than that, almost easy to miss, and that is why it matters. Imagine a simple day, people talking, cars passing, phones lighting up, a normal afternoon moving forward, but somewhere inside that ordinary day, your soulmate became unusually quiet. Something had been on their mind, and then they heard something that made them stop. It was not your name, not at first. It was something connected to you. A memory, a question, a small detail from the past that suddenly carried more weight than it used to. They tried to brush it aside. They smiled. They continued the conversation. But inside, something shifted, because sometimes one small sentence can open a door we thought we had already closed, and your soulmate may have realized something they were not ready to admit. Why does this person still matter to me? That question stayed with them. But that was only the beginning. The person beside them noticed the change. They asked what was wrong. Your soulmate said, "Nothing." But you and I both know, nothing can sometimes carry an entire story. They looked away. For a few seconds, the room seemed quieter, and then came another question, a question your soulmate did not expect, a question that reached deeper than the conversation they were having, and suddenly, the person they were with was no longer the most important thing in the room, because your soulmate's thoughts had moved somewhere else, toward you, toward a moment they still remembered, toward something unfinished. But why? Why would an ordinary day with someone else suddenly bring your memory back so strongly? There is another layer to this, and it may be the part that touches you most. Your soulmate was not simply remembering what happened between you. They were remembering how they felt around you. That is different. People can forget words. They can forget dates. They can even pretend they have moved on. But certain feelings remain quietly stored inside us, and sometimes life brings one of those feelings back without warning. Today may have been one of those moments, yet there was something even more surprising, because the person sitting with your soulmate noticed that their attention had drifted. They noticed the silence. They noticed the distant look, and they asked again. This time, your soulmate did not answer right away. There was a pause, a real pause, the kind that happens when someone is standing between what they want to say and what they are afraid to admit. Before I continue, if this message is touching your heart, you are welcome to support this work with a super thanks, only if it feels right for you. Now, let's continue, because after that pause, something changed. Your soulmate finally spoke. Not everything, not the whole truth, just enough to reveal that someone from their past still had a place in their thoughts, and the person beside them understood. They may not have known your name. They may not have known your story. But they could feel that this was not just an old memory. There was emotion behind it. There was unfinished meaning. And perhaps that is why your soulmate became even quieter, because deep down, they were asking themselves something they had avoided for longer than they wanted to admit. What if I never really stopped caring? That question can be uncomfortable, especially when life has already moved forward, especially when pride has built walls, especially when two people have spent time apart. But something about today made those walls feel thinner. And here is where the story becomes more mysterious. Because just when the conversation seemed to be ending, your soulmate. Received a message. They looked at the screen, their expression changed. They did not show it to the person beside them, they simply stared at it for a few seconds, then they put the phone down. Why? What could have appeared on that screen? Was it connected to you? Was it a reminder? Was it something that made an old feeling suddenly feel new again? There is no need to force an answer. Sometimes the most important moments are the ones we cannot explain yet. But your soulmate knew what that message made them feel, and for the first time today, they could no longer pretend that everything inside them was settled. The evening continued. The conversation moved on, but something had already changed. A quiet door had opened, and behind that door was a truth your soulmate had been avoiding, not a final answer, not a promise, not a certainty, just a feeling.